Welcome to the Hoosiers HQ podcast with IndyStar's IU insider Zach Osterman. I am Matt Glanesk. We are going to be talking about basketball recruiting. Obviously, Hoosier Hysteria this past weekend was a big moment for Archie Miller and the fan base. We'll talk IU football and the big game against Maryland this weekend and how it, Zach and I were talking just before the podcast that this really is a sneaky, really important game for the Hoosiers, especially if they want to go bowling. It's a winnable road game, have to have it. But first, we'll start with basketball. Romeo, Langford, Darius, Garland, 3 of the 4 2018 commits were there. Tell us about Hoosier Hysteria and the importance and where IU stands with King Romeo and Mr. Garland.
Can we not call him King Romeo?
Oh, King Romeo's not good? No?
He's a fine player. I'm not sure anybody deserves to be. In America, we don't have kings.
LeBron James is a king. King James.
Well, that's a fair point. You got me there.
Yeah.
Self-proclaimed. I'll call him King.
Self-proclaimed King
Romeo
James.
turns out to be LeBron James, I will call him King Romeo.
Okay.
We will reconvene for a podcast in 20 years. The only point of which is for me to call him. No, it was. I think the news has been positive for Indiana. Spoken to the fathers of both Langford, Tim Langford, Romeo's father, and Winston Garland, Darius' father, and gotten roundly positive sort of reactions from both, that they enjoyed the parts of their visit that maybe they thought they would enjoy, that they were maybe even a little bit surprised by certain parts of their visit, just in terms of kind of the atmosphere that was waiting for them, or pleasantly surprised, to be clear. And, if you're Indiana fans, you probably hope there's maybe a little bit of some connection between these two guys. I think there were some tweets circulating on Saturday that they were taking, those silly photos that kids take on their recruiting visits. They were taking them together. I know that they do have sort of like a prior relationship. I'm not acting like they're the best of friends, but I think these two kids do know each other. And
haven't they been looking at the same schools? Haven't they been looking at Vanderbilt, UCLA, Indiana? Haven't they had
Vanderbilt? Those are the 3. But
okay.
Romeo's also gone to Kansas. Garland's gone to Kentucky. Romeo's gone to North Carolina. So they have some of the same finalists. Again, they have a relationship. I'm not anointing this a package deal or anything, but there is kind of a prior relationship there. And if you're Indiana, that can only help when you're also coming out of a weekend where it seems like, based on everything everyone's willing to say publicly, you really kind of got your best foot forward with both guys.
All right, so, can you just paint the picture for it? From what I saw, it looked like a coronation. And I know you have to do everything you can to woo these kids and to make them feel special. I went to Hoosier Hysteria when it was, I think it's still late at night. But I don't remember recruits being paraded down the center of the court for everyone to see. I remember them usually, they would just walk in the side and people would get excited. But is this something new that they've paraded them down the center court, almost like a coronation?
I remember Kenny Johnson doing it with Troy Williams and B.J. Anya at Hoosier Hysteria a few years ago. So, it wasn't exactly an original idea anyway. I think it's still smart in a way. It gives kind of every kid his own sort of moment. And you even think, they even did it with a couple of 2019 kids that were in town. They did it with all of the current commitments that were in town. So, just generally speaking, you kind of feel like everybody gets their moment, everybody gets their due, I guess. But when you do that, I think you're probably going to do it wanting to hear later on that the atmosphere and the electricity and, the way the crowd seemed to embrace X or Y or Z player was a really big part of the visit, and then that's what you hear. I think that's good. I think it has the intended effect, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay, you talked to both Darius Garland's father and Romeo Langford's father. Did either of them give you any indication, say, that this visit on Saturday might have changed things for them, might have given them a different light of Indiana and Archie Miller?
I don't know if change things is quite the right term. and I know kind of what you're saying. I think, I mean, you got to remember these are two guys kind of coming at it from different directions at the same time. I mean, Garland has been to Indiana quite a few times, and Romeo has too. But I mean, Garland is this was by no means Garland's first visit to Bloomington or to an IU. I mean, he was at the Maryland game on Yogi Ferrell's senior day a couple of years ago. So, he's well acquainted even with the Assembly Hall atmosphere, if you will. I think both of these guys too, if there's something that really maybe did change, it's that both of these families, both these players, and also both these families are still kind of figuring out, who Archie Miller is, what his style is. This was a chance to get him to watch him run a practice, watch him interact with his players. Somebody said once, I forget who it was, they said that Midnight Madness is the first time that high school players find out that the college coaches who've been recruiting them know swear words. And so it's maybe just a more kind of upfront look at the program. And when you hear, again, and I don't mean to keep coming back to the same quotes, but when you hear these really positive reactions after maybe you're going in trying to get a different angle or a different viewpoint to one you already have on a program, I don't want to. I'm dancing around this a little bit because I don't want to mischaracterize what anybody said. I don't want to say that like, they told me that I use their lead school now or whatever. But when you've got two guys that probably have had some questions about Indiana, what they can expect, the direction of the program, what kind of coach Archie Miller is, what kind of system he runs, how they would fit into what he's doing, those sorts of things, and then you see, kind of the reaction that we saw, or you get the quotes, the reaction that we got right after the visit. It's very, very good news.
Would it be fair to say that IU is building some substantial momentum when it comes to Romeo Langford?
I mean, I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah.
So I mean, where would you handicap it at if you had to? I know he still has the Kansas visit. He's poked around Vanderbilt. UCLA is always, UCLA, and sometimes those kids see palm trees, and they don't have those in Bloomington. But he knows what he's getting into, I guess, with Indiana. So how would you handicap it? Obviously, in Louisville's out of the thing, and Kentucky's out of it as well, if I'm not mistaken. Correct? Who are the five schools left?
Well, we already did this. We already talked about this. With Romeo, it's UNC, UCLA, Vanderbilt,
UNC, that's
Indiana,
right.
and Kansas.
That's right, UNC.
With Garland, it's Kentucky, IU, UCLA, and Vanderbilt.
Okay.
So, I mean, and I'll also admit I've not talked to these guys after every one of these official visits that they've taken, but I would certainly say that in my experience of covering recruiting, I think Indiana's in as good of a position with either of these kids, just trying to get a read on the field right now, as good of a position with either of these kids as anybody. Again, you're right to point out they've both still got officials to take, and that's not, that's really not to be underrated or underappreciated. But I think Indiana, if nothing else, I would say Indiana's done everything that it can, and put its best foot forward. And so it's a question of, kind of whether these guys whether that's been enough, I guess.
And they have room to accommodate both on the roster for 2018?
Well, they would oversign if they took both.
Okay.
So we'd be back in kind of that, that question again. But anybody who's listened to this podcast long enough will know that I was, there was that phrase that followed Tom Crean around all the time, creening. Anybody who's followed this podcast long enough will know that I would tell anybody who asked that reputation was probably a lot more fiction than fact when it came to Tom and just sort of running players off. You just never know what's going to happen. Transfers. I mean, Indiana's going to lose 5 seniors after this year, so there's going to be a heavy amount of turnover guaranteed one way or the other. Then you don't know if somebody makes an NBA-level leap, a la Victor Oladipo or OG Anunoby. You don't know if somebody's just not happy in Bloomington. You don't know if maybe a freshman shows up, finds out he's really not a fit for the new staff and the new system, and he decides he wants to move on. But Indiana would take both of these guys, even if it put them in an overtime situation. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
All right, well, let's look to what was on the court Saturday with the scrimmage. I know we don't know a lot when we see these scrimmages, but this really was kind of the first time that people got to see what an Archie Miller IU team might look like. What were some of your impressions from the scrimmage?
Yeah, and this is going to sound weird, but it was kind of hard to take a lot from it. And part of that is maybe that we still don't know. I still don't have a great read on. I mean, I could, after covering Tom Crean for a long period of time, if I saw a freshman do certain things or play a certain way in the scrimmage type setting like Hoosier Hysteria, I could say, I think that guy's going to be a really good fit because I know that Tom likes his guard to be able to do this, or I know that he likes, I know that he needs a little bit of extra shooting help, and this guy's knocking down threes. There wasn't maybe anybody that really jumped out. I mean, I think Indiana should be encouraged by the confidence that you see in guys like Devontae Green and Robert Johnson. That was maybe one of the biggest things. And Green finished, they don't keep stats for these things, but unofficially Green finished with 14 points, which was the scrimmage high. I also thought you saw Robert Johnson, this is kind of a weird way to say it, but being a more complete offensive player, or trying to be, that he was taking players off the dribble a little bit more than maybe we've seen the last couple of years, that he was shooting through tighter windows from behind the arc, that he was just generally sort of trying to behave a little bit more like a leading scorer rather than a guy that, is maybe caught between deferring to teammates at times and then at times looking for his own shot. I thought I saw Robert Johnson looking for his own shot a lot and a lot more, and in a lot of different ways than what I think maybe I can remember from his first 3 years in Bloomington. So those are a couple of things that really stuck out. I wanted to see Al Durham because I liked Al Durham as a recruit. I know he wasn't, highly rated or whatever, but I really did kind of like what I saw from him as a recruit.
You like him because he's from Georgia.
Well, that's true, too. We're men of Atlanta. But he sat out because we don't know exactly what it is, but we were told that everyone who was sitting out was just for precautionary reasons, that no one was basically that everyone should be okay. They just didn't need to be scrimmaging.
So no concern about Colin Hartman?
Again, I mean, I think that it was another one of those, and Archie Miller's been really clear since the spring about how he doesn't feel like he needs to push Hartman, that Hartman's kind of one of those guys that as a player, Miller can trust. He knows what he's got in Colin Hartman. He knows that Colin Hartman knows how to take care of his body, how to be ready for a season, and those sorts of things. He doesn't need to force anything or rush it. Now, if, Colin Hartman's limited in both exhibition games and we're still hearing that kind of stuff, I might be a little bit more concerned, frankly. But as, for right now, I'll be willing to take Archie's word for it because, again, I think Knight was sort of famous for being that way, that when it came to guys who were seniors, he could be tough on them. But, unless they really gave him cause to be pissed off about certain things, he also knew that he could stay out of their way in certain situations because they knew what they were doing. They were experienced. They were veterans. They could take care of themselves.
Hey, you can't say pissed off. You have to say ticked off.
I can't?
No,
dang it.
Ticked off. Dang it is okay. I'll let dang it fly. But ticked
all
off.
Right.
Okay.
Get the bleep button.
No, that's
ready.
all right.
I'm sorry.
The swear jar's on my desk. You'll just put a couple dollars in there. So yeah, all right. Well, the Hoosiers play Marion exhibition on Friday Friday or Saturday at 8:00, right?
Saturday, yeah.
Saturday at 8:00 at Assembly Hall. Marion versus IU. So we'll learn more about the Hoosiers basketball and what Archie Miller, what we can expect. Obviously, it's an NAIA school, so it's an exhibition, but still, it'd be nice to see the ball bounce a few times and a game actually be played. All right, so let's switch to football. Hoosiers. It's the same story. I felt like we had the same we can have the same conversation after the Ohio State game, after the Penn State game, maybe not so much the Penn State game, but the Michigan game, the Michigan State game. They had their chances. They played really tough against a ranked team, and then they come up short and lose, which is typical Indiana football. So, is this different than any other year, or do we just have to say, okay, 0-4 to start the Big Ten, which was, I guess, anticipated when you look at the 4 teams they were opening up against in the Big Ten? And now the real schedule starts. Now we really, this is what we're going to find out about Indiana, if they are improved, if they are bowl-worthy, or if they are just what everyone in the country thinks Indiana football is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think, I guess to some degree, and this is maybe being a little bit harsh on Tom Allen, but I don't think it's unfair to point out that, his motto or his mantra for the season's been breakthrough. And what that's been about is really maybe winning one of those games, one of those Michigan. I mean, getting back to a bowl, basically doing everything Indiana did, last year, 2 years ago, but then also on top of that, throwing in a kind of a signature win that maybe Indiana hasn't been able to pick up. But in the ultimate sort of reckoning of this season, it's like many seasons for Indiana. It's going to be about whether or not you can get to a bowl game, and then whether or not you can win that bowl game. Because now Indiana all of a sudden, has a 2-game or I guess a 3-game bowl losing streak going back to the Insight Bowl as well. And I think you're right in the sense that the real test of Indiana's mettle was always going to be what you consider sort of the peer programs, I guess, in the Big Ten, your Marylands, your Illinois, your Rutgers, your Purdue's. And now you're in a situation where that's, it's not just that you want to win those games, it's that you have to win those games. I mean, you've got to find a way to get 3 wins from your next 5, or, well, I shouldn't say you're not going bowling, because I think I've seen some projections that have Indiana in bowl games that I've never heard of.
First of all, there are half the bowl games I've never heard of. Let's just throw that out there.
Well, but I did not. The Frisco Bowl did not apparently exist until this year.
I've never heard of the Frisco Bowl.
Well, again, it didn't exist until
this
year.
Is that a Frisco Melt? Is that Frisco, Texas? Is that San Francisco, California? Where is the Frisco Bowl?
It's Frisco, Texas.
Okay.
You're going to enjoy this.
So that's a soccer stadium.
This is from our own USA Today bowl projections. The game is scheduled to be played at the home stadium of FC Dallas.
Yeah, soccer stadium. Yeah, that's Frisco. I knew that. Toyota Park. Yeah, no, I know. I know MLS. I know MLS. I'm a stan.
That'd be a nice, cozy little venue.
No, the only IU team I want to see play in a soccer stadium is the men's soccer team. That's it.
I mean, they probably need to play in a bigger stadium than one that seats like 14,000. But one way or the other, I'm guessing that was from our own USA Today projections.
I want the Boca Raton Bowl. I want the Popeyes Chicken Boca Raton Bowl.
I'm guessing that is a projection based on IU finishing 5 and 7, but going to a bowl. So I think it's important to maybe note that Indiana still appears to be one of the best sort of borderline bowl teams in terms of academic progress rate.
So that's how they would get it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it's determined. If you have bowl spots that are open that need to be filled, and you've got some 5 and 7 teams, I mean, my understanding anyway.
Did Minnesota backdoor that? Did Minnesota back into a bowl like that a couple years ago? Or am I making that up?
And Illinois did. Minnesota might have as well.
Illinois' APR was that high, huh?
I remember when it was, I think Minnesota did as well. I just remember there being a cluster of Big Ten teams, and that was the year that Indiana beat Purdue to get 6-6 and go to the Pinstripe Bowl under Kevin Wilson. And I remember there being a cluster of Big Ten teams, including Indiana, that were 5 and 6 or whatever. And we were kind of looking at the math and being like, well, these are going to be the teams that wind up trying to play their way into a bowl game at 5 and 7. So I would not rule out, if Indiana can win 2 of the next 5, I would not rule out going to a bowl. If Indiana can win 3 of the next 5, obviously they are guaranteed to go to a bowl. And at that point, it would just be a question of, could you win 4 out of the 5? Could you beat Maryland? Could you beat Purdue? Could you basically run the table against every team that's not Wisconsin? Because that's the only ranked team, and in fact the only team that currently has a winning record left on Indiana's schedule. So could you win 3 of those 5, or maybe even 4 of those 5? You've kind of got to win this weekend, just because your margin for error is down to almost nothing if you don't. And also because, frankly, and I wrote this yesterday, the great sort of hand-wringing that's been going on in the IU fan base right now has been around the offense, and wondering how an offense that was setting records just 2 years ago has regressed so much. The reality is Indiana in Big Ten play has played 4 top 20 defenses. They only have 1 top 20 defense from here on out, and Maryland is outside the top 100 in both scoring defense and yards per game allowed. So this is the kind of weekend where if you truly believe that your offense is, headed in the right direction and is doing all the right things, this is the game where if you're Indiana, you need to say, well, look, yes, we really struggled against Michigan. It's Michigan State, but what we were doing is we were laying the foundation for an offense that wasn't gonna struggle so much against teams that were not, elite or borderline elite defensively. Maryland's about as bad as it comes for the rest of the year for Indiana. They need to win this game, and then they probably need to do it putting up some points.
Well, I'm going to break down the differences between this offense and offenses of the past of IU. Here we go. You ready? There's no All-Americans on the offensive line. You don't have a running back that's going to rush for 1,000 yards and get drafted in the NFL. You don't have a quarterback who has basically all the throws open to him. You have a limited passing attack with Peyton Ramsey. I mean, he's a freshman. He's a redshirt freshman. Your running back that you are leaning on now is a true freshman. So that's why. I mean, you still have good receivers. You have a tight end I think this is the first time IU's used a tight end in the last, 5 years. So you have a tight end that's useful if he can stay healthy.
Hey, you're forgetting Michael Cooper.
No, I'm not. No.
Michael Cooper was honorable mention All Big Ten, my man.
What, for blocking?
No.
No, Michael Cooper. Wasn't Michael Cooper? Or am I thinking of David Cooper, the linebacker?
David Cooper was a middle linebacker who also cut his teammate's hair.
I think he was better than Michael Cooper.
Well, he was never honorable mention All Big Ten. Michael Cooper was All Big Ten.
The last tight end I can remember is Ted Bolzer.
Michael Cooper was Nate Sudfeld's tight end, and he was an All Big Ten tight end.
You know what? I think you're right. I forgot about Michael Cooper. What's that say about Michael Cooper?
What does that say about you?
Hey,
you know what I think is hard, and I touched on this just a little bit in that piece I wrote, for Indiana fans to swallow, is offense has kind of been the one sort of IU football birthright. You know what I mean? The one thing IU fans could count on most years was having an offense that could compete with almost anybody in the Big Ten.
I mean, that starts with Randall L. too. When I was a freshman, I mean, they were putting up 60 on Wisconsin and Michigan State and Northwestern. They were putting up. It's always been offense at IU.
And Ben Chappell set records.
Yeah, I mean every quarterback kept set. Yeah, Kellen Lewis set records.
Yeah, a great, genuinely a borderline great Big Ten quarterback. He never would have been able to play in the pros, obviously, because I think he weighed about 145 pounds. But I mean, in the Big Ten, Kellen Lewis was a fantastic QB. It's an offense that if you actually look at how much it has lost over the last 2 years, about the only players that if you were to break down the offense from 2015 and this offense and say, who would you rather have, the player in X position in 15 or the player in X position in 17? Probably about the only players you'd take would be Simi Cobbs and Wes Martin, and that's just because they are older, more experienced versions of themselves than they were when they were starting for Indiana in 2015. And I get why people are frustrated. I'd also point out this is an offense that has had basically no luck with injuries. I mean, they've lost 2 of their top 3 receivers. You talk about improved tight end play, but Ian Thomas has been playing hurt most of the season. The offensive line is patchwork at best at this point. I think there's a fair debate, frankly, to be had over Peyton Ramsey versus Rich Lego and what the offense could do if Lego was still the quarterback, but it's not. If Lego was still
the quarterback, then the offense would probably put up more points. They'd probably put up more yardage, but they would definitely turn the ball over more and putting your defense in a more difficult position. You wouldn't have a game like the 17-9 game at Michigan State. If Lego was in there, it's a totally different game. And I think as a defensive coach, Tom Allen is going with a quarterback who puts his defense in the best position to win a game. Peyton Ramsey is not going to hurt you, whereas Richard Lego might have helped you, but he also, I mean, how many turnovers did he have in a year and a half? Quite a bit. So,
yeah,
I mean,
a lot.
So I think that's part of the reason why he made that change. He doesn't probably think that Peyton Ramsey gives his offense the best chance to succeed. At least I don't think he does. Because Richard Lego, I mean, look at what he did against Ohio State.
I think he thinks Ramsey gives his offense a better chance to stay on schedule.
Yeah,
and when you
be
talk,
consistent.
I don't think it's unimportant to when I say that to remember it's not just about turnovers. It's also about like sacks. I mean, if you know your offensive line is struggling, if you know that you've lost your right guard at this point, you're just maybe now getting Brandon Knight back to full fitness. You still have a very, very tenuous sort of position rotation going on at center. Now Coy Cronk looks like he might be out for a little while. Tom Allen said they were taking a wait-and-see approach with him this week. But if he misses any time, now you're missing your starting left tackle, maybe your most talented offensive lineman for who knows how long. And if you have a quarterback like Lego who is stationary, and Richard Lego made every effort, I believe, to be more mobile in the offseason, to try and be more of a mobile threat, or at least to move the pocket and roll out a little bit more. But he just doesn't have the elusiveness that Ramsey does. Then you're also talking about taking more sacks, which might lead to more turnovers, but it's certainly going to lead to problems with field position. If you're taking more sacks and more drives are going into 2nd and 13 or 3rd and 17, and that's not Rich Lego's fault per se. It's just the unfortunate reality of a team where the offensive personnel has taken a dramatic step back over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. So what else do we have going in Maryland? Is that it? I mean, you want to talk about how good this defense has played?
It's interesting. This weekend's kind of a weird test for the defense because
no quarterback.
The defense is playing fantastically well, yes, but DJ Moore is one of the most dynamic playmakers in the league. And Maryland's also just more of a sideline-to-sideline offense, whereas, and I'm not saying it's easy to defend Michigan or Michigan State, but those are going to be sort of, what you call, I guess you'd say, base offenses. You're talking about a fullback, a tight end, 2 tight ends. You're talking about run to set up the pass and all that stuff. Maryland is going to try and get outside the tackle box quickly. Maryland's going to try and use speed and versatility to get to the edges and turn up field. And so you're just, we've seen Indiana the last 2 weeks start with 3 linebackers, even though they run that 4-2-5, because they knew they were facing offenses that were kind of going to run a power game. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about another sort of spread, more up-tempo, certainly more kind of sideline-to-sideline stretchy-out offense. I just think it's a different test, basically.
Marcelino Ball, is he playing yet, or is he still out?
He's still out, and again, a wait-and-see thing. I think Tom Allen is well-versed at being cagey with injuries. Kevin Wilson sometimes would try to protect those things, and sometimes he just kind of come out and be like, yep, he's got a what Kevin used to say. He'd say he's got a deal. He's got a knee deal.
Kevin loved injured players.
Yeah, he's let's not go down that road. But he'd say he's got a knee deal, and we're gonna be without him for a few weeks.
And I'm gonna go make him eat last, and I'm gonna make him stand underneath that tent over there, away from everybody else. Okay, don't do it.
I thought we weren't. I thought we
right.
weren't going down.
You said no, don't.
I mean, it's just. I do think that some of these guys, like Ball, like Ashawn Riggins. I mean, we've seen Ball walking with a somewhat noticeable limp, but that doesn't necessarily diagnose anything. I think there are guys that the staff very much wants to get back this year, if at all possible. But I don't think that anybody's got a firm timetable. I don't think anybody can say it's going to be another week, it's going to be another 2 weeks. I certainly think they're still trying to get them back. I mean, Tom Allen more or less came out and said this week that Donovan Hale's season is probably over. If that were the case, or with Ball, then I think you would maybe just see him kind of say, look, these guys just aren't going to be able to make it back this year. So I don't think they're at that point yet. But, it has been a long time now. And you also kind of want to take into consideration, like with Donovan Hale, for example, he's only played 3 games, and Allen suggested he might be able to get back at the very end of the season. But if they don't force him back, he can take a medical red shirt, because 3 games is the cutoff for getting a medical waiver and getting your year back. I'd have to go look and figure out exactly where Ball Wiggins are, but if you get really deep into the season, it might just be more worth it to retain that year of eligibility than to try to force them back on the field in late November in a bowl game.
All right. Well, he is IndyStar IU insider Zach Osterman. The Hoosiers play at Maryland 3:30 on Saturday. TV, do you know? Big Ten, I'm guessing.
BTN.
Yeah, I'm guessing Big Ten. ABC doesn't want that one.
BTN.
Yeah, ESPN
Wisconsin will be a noon ABC
nooner.
game. For
Yeah,
those
a nooner. That's 3
that
ABC games out of the last 4. That's big time.
Yeah?
No, and the ratings are always good for IU, even if their offense isn't. So there you go.
I mean, they're the best of the rest, maybe not. Man,
Yeah.
Who knows? This weekend's big. I mean, it does feel a little bit like this weekend's kind of a statement game a little bit because you get Rutgers at home, and I think Rutgers is a better team than it was a year ago, but it's still Rutgers, and that's still senior day for T. Gray Scales and Richard Fant and Chase Dutra and Chris Covington. That's just not the kind of game you would imagine Indiana loses. And then you get Illinois on the road, and Illinois is just a bad football team that looks deeply unmotivated right now. So if you win this game, the highway's open to at least 6 wins, and then maybe if you go into the Purdue game at 6-5 with bowl positioning to play for, and maybe Purdue's just kind of strung out after a promising year, but nonetheless by that point just kind of beat up and worn down. Maybe you can get to 7 wins, but if you can't win this weekend, you've got it all to do to try and get even to 6.
All right.
This is a real kind of hinge game.
Okay.
I think the season swings
you off.
one way or the other on Maryland.
How many times do I got to cut you off?
How many times? Who knows? Let me say some more things.
No, we're done.
The
All right.
greatest
Nope.
football
There's
game
a
that's
basketball
ever played.
game on Friday or Saturday at 8:00. There's a football game on Saturday at 3:30. Plenty for you Hoosiers fans to keep up with. Go to IndyStar.com/sports. Follow Zach on Twitter at Zach Osterman. And thank you for listening. And download the app and do all sorts of other good stuff and enjoy the week, even though the weather's supposed to stink. Bye.